The world of Bloodborne is one whose meaning is in constant question. What is the purpose of existing in a world ravaged by the beast scourge, in a world where your family members can turn into mindless animals every hunt, where the cure-all propagated through the city by government and community is actually a poison intent on corrupting humanity? Does it or should it mean anything? And is there any real truth we can gather through insight? You can easily look at Bloodborne through this lens. Examining the game through a purely nihilistic viewpoint is very easy because this world does seem hopeless and meaningless for humanity, and each ending can be interpreted as a different flavour of misery. Our modern-day understanding of nihilism denies the existence of genuine moral truths or values, and asserts the ultimate meaninglessness or purposelessness of life or of the universe, as quoted from Britannica. And that's what we'll be looking at today. Is there any genuine truth to be found in Yharnam? Is there a meaning or significance to the actions we and others take, or is the entire game ultimately meaningless? We'll start by looking at the game through a nihilistic lens, but afterwards, we'll see if we can interpret the same points with optimism. As such, we'll bring in existentialism and absurdism. And through writing this, I think I've concluded that all the approaches are interesting and valid, but I personally lean more towards optimistic choices because I'm just a loving, positive soul, as all my friends would tell you. But anyway, remember to subscribe, check out the Twitch, comment your thoughts below, and let's begin the video. In The Trial by Kafka, spoilers ahead, we're shown a world that exists within rules that seem to make no sense, have no real meaning, and have no way to be changed or affected by us. Protagonist K is put on a mysterious trial, and throughout the book we watch as he's beholden to an incomprehensible court with just as incomprehensible laws. His actions, his attempt at a defense, are both meaningless. There's no way out of this system and no way to understand it. By the end of the book, K accepts this and accepts his fate. Like a lot of Kafka's work, it's a very nihilistic reflection of society, a story that's hard to understand and harder to accept once it's over. And for the trial in particular, I think we can interpret the hunt as a similar system. When we arrive into Yharnam, like K arriving at the courthouse, we are plunged into a world with rules and laws we can't understand, into a world where humans hold no significance besides being used by unseen wills or being used as experiments by stronger egos. Similarly, we're told by a mysterious figure to become a hunter in return for blood, and from there, we're on our own, fighting our way through a world that has no explanation. The hunt is thusly similar to the trial. We're placed into a system that nobody seems capable of understanding, and one that has no greater truth. Even practiced hunters like Jura and Aileen have no greater concept of what this all means, how and why Yharnam is subjected to endless violence which can turn you, me and the other guy into beasts at any given moment. Because the hunt is just the hunt. Even if we do find pale blood, the apparent root of the scourge, there's no reason given to us that explains the system. Insight is apparently a greater truth, and whilst it does illuminate eldritch abominations for us, it doesn't paint a much clearer picture. We find no explanation as to why the Moon Presence wants the hunt to continue, nor do we find out why the Great Ones lose their children. We are enlightened to the Amygdala's presence, but find no explanation to their number or their intention. And from the name Madman's Knowledge, we can see the insight for every person besides maybe us is just an evolved form of insanity, not a greater truth we can use to understand the hunt. Through this comparative lens, you can see the hunt and by extension the world as meaningless. We and the residents of Yharnam are thrown into a hunt with no knowable rules and no escape. A hunt that's bound to repeat itself endlessly to bring more and more hunters into the dream, and if we accept Gurman's offer at the end of the game, we're in the same position as K. We've accepted our fate. There's nothing more to understand or any greater meaning to discern. We wake up, bathed in violence, likely worse off than we were before. So you can ask, what was the point of it all? The trial of humanity, the hunt, will continue. Let's move now to the characters we meet in the game, and try to discern if their actions have any meaning within this nihilistic setting. We'll start with Gascoigne because he is one of my favourites, and fun fact, as I talked about on TikTok, he doesn't care at all if you bring him to his daughter. Shameless plug, my TikTok is almost at 10k, so if you enjoy slop, you will really like it there. Anyway, Gascoigne is the archetypal hunter. He hunts for the sake of it. To him it means duty, an expected action to protect his family and his home. But this attempt at finding meaning crumbles, and we find him on the precipice of beasthood. It appears he's even murdered his wife, and we know he's left his terrified children behind. His attempt to give purpose to the hunt has ended with him blood drunk and mindless, a victim of the system, and his family even more so. Alfred apparently found meaning in destroying the Vile Bloods. It's his duty, his purpose in life. But as we see from his collapsing pupils, he too is on the brink of beasthood. And this so-called purpose of his was not his rational choice, but a combination of church propaganda and beasthood, which we can clearly see from his deranged reaction to finding Annalise. There's no great truth to be found on his path of vengeance, and no inherent morality to hunting Annalise when the church does the exact same thing as the Vile Bloods, partake in blood communion. The executioners are long dead, and the church actively collapsing, so what is the point of Alfred's quest? Killing Annalise changes nothing, and to top it all off, we can completely undo what Alfred does. Looking at it this way, there's zero significance to any of his actions in the game. We can also ask, as the game does, is revenge inherently nihilistic? A lot of media has covered the cycle of violence that revenge leads to, and lots of media has considered this cycle meaningless. For a lot of people, you can only live and find significance once you let go of that anger for greater things, and Alfred never does that. He acquires his vengeance, then dies. There's nothing more to his story. He's fighting ghosts, for ghosts, becomes a victim of this meaningless cycle. On the other hand, we have Jura and Aileen, two characters who've made it their duty to protect Yharnam during the hunts. Jura guards Old Yharnam, and Aileen hunts down any blood-drunk hunters she finds in order to protect the citizens from ending up like Gascoigne's family. But the beasts in Old Yharnam are long-turned. This part of the city has been cordoned off and left to rot. What good is it to spend your life guarding it? Guarding transformed humans who can never be returned to a state of conscious humanity. So it's very easy to look at Jura's work as insignificant because, really, it is. Whatever he's trying to accomplish changes nothing, even more so when we barge in and cut down half the beastly population he's sworn to protect. The damage to Old Yharnam can't be undone, and no inherent truth can be found by subjecting yourself to this purgatory. Aileen is in a similar situation, fighting for the city in the way she knows best. But central Yharnam is barely any different from the scorned old section. Residents have gone mad or silent in their homes, and beasts prowl every corner. Even she knows this, she tells it to you. There's no great meaning to be found here for these two characters, just an obligation to a violent system that cares not for their contribution. Gehrman and Maria are worth considering as well. Gehrman is a vital piece of the hunt, but as we've established, there's no inherent meaning to be found within the hunt. We're never given a concrete reason for its existence, nor its continuation. There's no inherent meaning or purpose we humans can find within it. And Gehrman is stuck in this cycle, unable to leave, unable to seek answers, unable to comprehend the being that has enslaved him in this dream. Even the doll he created offers no meaning to his life. In fact, he actively dislikes her. So there's no meaning to Gehrman's life besides the perpetuation of the hunt, and we can see he's long lost the will to live, dreaming only of rescue from friends who've also been obliterated by violence. Maria is stuck in a similar purgatory, as are all the old hunters, who you can apply this argument to. The reason I look to her in particular is because she felt great regret for what she'd done. She cast her weapons into the well and disappeared into the nightmare. But when we find her, those weapons are still bound to her, a physical manifestation of her guilt. Despite her feeling terrible for what she'd done, she's stuck in this purgatory like everyone else. No matter her choice, she is trapped in a nightmare she can't escape from. No friends, no enemies, just the research hall patients to further remind her of the suffering the church caused and the suffering she upheld. Nothing she does in this twisted reality matters. There's no truth for her to find, nor any significance her actions could possibly produce. And we can view every character in this light, really. The chapel dweller, despite their good intentions, achieves nothing. Everyone within the chapel suffers a terrible fate. Annalise is the only remaining vile blood, and nothing she's doing seems to be changing that. She's alone in a cursed castle with no effect on the rest of society. Willem can do nothing but sit in his chair and point towards a place that definitely doesn't require pointing to find. Despite all his research, he wasn't able to acquire Ascension, though the growths on him suggest he was perhaps close. And Mikolash sacrificed an entire city and his entire school in order to achieve Ascension, but he failed and forgot all he'd done. What was the point of these two men's horrific actions if their goals were never even met? And yeah, I know I was lenient on Willem in my last Bloodborne video. In fact, I interpreted him as a relatively positive force, all things considered, but I'd like to amend that statement. From these jars we find in Byrgenwerth, and the idea that Rom was an unwilling participant due to her vacuous nature, as the game describes, it's a fair interpretation to see Willem as a lot less moral than I originally outlined. Let's move on to consider our protagonist, the Hunter, and what impact our actions have alongside the endings we can choose. In Bloodborne, we have a lot more agency than we've ever had in Dark Souls, wherein the cycle is doomed to repeat itself no matter what we choose. Because in Bloodborne, despite the possibility that the cycle of the hunt may repeat, there's a lot more ambiguity in what impact our actions really had, which is, in part, due to our lack of a sequel. But if we're going to look at things nihilistically, you can argue that our in-game escapades don't add up to much significance, and are instead evidence towards the philosophy's core principles, that there's no inherent meaning in living and making decisions. And it's difficult to break down and actually explore this subject, I found, because yeah, at the end of the day, you can just say nothing matters, and that's that. What else is there to say? So I hope the video so far has been somewhat understandable, and since we're having a little break, I'm going to take a minute to advertise the Discord. We've just hit 500 members and started weekly event nights, so if you're looking for a place to hang out and also coincidentally like the content, then make sure to join us. But back to the video. We do make changes to Yharnam throughout the game and kill multiple Great Ones who have an unknown effect on the world at large, but in both Yharnam Sunrise and Honouring Wishes, the hunt continues. And we see from the silence that takes over all the homes in Yharnam, there's not much left alive in the city. To further that point, almost every NPC we try to help ends up mad or dead. Our attempt to find significance through kindness leads to nothing but failure, accentuated well by the harrowing questline of Gascoigne's daughter. Innocence is personified in this young girl, a beacon of hope in the city, the future generation. She represents all of that and, well, she dies. Because of us, really. Sending NPCs to Erden's chapel, an apparent safe haven, leads them all to madness or death if we invite the suspicious beggar. There's no meaning to be found in the hunt, and no meaning to be found with other people. The healing church was already crumbling with or without us, shown by Amelia's transformation. Mensis has destroyed itself, and Byrgenwerth is hardly on the map. There are no great systems for us to overcome, then. Our only purpose is to live and hunt. There's no greater meaning or task for us, especially as one of the most significant Great Ones, Erden, lives in every ending. So, as Tolstoy said, if life has no purpose, if it's been given to us for its own sake, we have no reason for living. We already mentioned earlier how the Yharnam Sunrise ending could be seen as nihilistic and similar to the fate of Kay in the trial, but there is a bit more to talk about there. We know that the hunt will return because both Aileen and Jura have left the dream before, and the moon presence still lives. That meaningless system is yet to be toppled, regardless of the church's current state. And knowing the power the church held over Yharnam, I think it's likely the remaining members or citizens would just reform it anew. We also have reason to believe that we'll lose at least some of our memories. Aileen and Jura both remember the dream, but Miklash laments that he'll forget everything once he wakes up. So the possibility is there, that the things we did, the people we met and the people we killed, will all be wiped from our memory. We'd be used by the hunt and spat out without changing or remembering anything. I'd call that pretty meaningless, and I doubt any significant truth can be discerned from blurred memories and blood. But I think Honouring Wishes is even worse. At least there's some ambiguity with the sunrise, some possibility that we run away and find a reason to live somewhere else. At least we're physically free. But here, we replace Gurman, whose position we've already outlined as meaningless. He's a set piece in a hopeless hunt that has no concern for humanity, so by becoming him, we're just taking up that spot. Our reward for completing the game is being enslaved. There's no truth to be found and no way to escape. We're trapped in this void for the rest of eternity, until another hunter comes around to replace us in the cycle. Let's finish off with childhood's beginning. On a surface level, this ending seems quite appealing because waking up as God doesn't seem so bad. But hasn't the entire game taught us that seeking ascension is actually very bad for humanity? It's the reason Yharnam is in this mess, and we've spent half the game eliminating every Great One we see. How can we see this ending as a good one then? We've completely thrown away our humanity. We don't just grow up into a squid guy, we regress back to childhood and start a new life. It can be safely assumed, then, that we've discarded and forgotten being a human. Our flesh is gone, and we've become something entirely new. Yes, we are now a powerful, incomprehensible being, but why would we change anything for the rest of humanity? We might just continue the hunt, or even make things worse, because, as we see through the game, 99% of the Great Ones have absolutely no regard for the human race. It is hard to completely frame this nihilistically because you do become God. But you can argue it's inherently meaningless still because is this creature even us anymore? As I've outlined, we've been reduced back to childhood. Without our memories, experience, and humanity, what's the point of living? Are we even alive still? Or can we consider this squid baby to be an entirely different being? And is there really an inherent truth we can find in the cosmos with our new consciousness? Or is this a lie perpetuated by Bergenworth? Will we find anything out in that void, or will the insignificance of it all look back at us in our new form and offer nothing? Let's move properly on to the Great Ones and the concept of God or gods in nihilistic thought. Of course, the two ideas are quite opposed, historically so, but actually can coexist. Because even if you're convinced of a god's existence, that god may not care about you or maybe even hate you. Thus, no inherent value can be found through them, and the Great Ones in the game are pretty close to gods, at least as far as humanity is aware. Erden is the main Great One in this game, alongside the Moon Presence, so let's cover Erden first. It's hard to place human emotions onto these creatures, but I think we can pinpoint a clear indifference they have for us and our suffering. In my previous Bloodborne video, I covered Erden as a rather benevolent force, but I'd like to correct myself. Through Ariana's story, we can clearly see that he is, at least, uncaring, maybe worse. Erden, like all Great Ones, wants a child, and he uses numerous women in the game to try achieve this goal, the primary one being Ariana. Despite the suffering he inflicts upon her, there is an absolute indifference in the way the being is presented. Not only do we never interact with him or even come across him, but he takes advantage of multiple women. Not only Ariana, there's Fake Yasofka and Queen Yharnam too. And Queen Yharnam was used by Erden, the Thumerians, and the School of Mensis once they learned of Murgo's existence. It's interesting commentary on how women's bodies are abused by society and patriarchy, but we've already covered most of that in this video. Back to the current topic. From the numerous victims of Erden, we can see that this omnipresent godlike figure is, at the very least, indifferent to our existence. And I say omnipresent because, from the statues we see of him throughout the entire game, we can assume that he is at least perceived as omnipresent. And from the pain these women go through, I don't think it would be a stretch to say he feels negatively towards us. Yes, he is the namesake of the only safe place in the game, but is it really safe? The chapel dweller is probably mad, and you could link this underlying danger in the chapel to the underlying danger behind this entity some have decided to praise. This is, of course, a nihilistic viewpoint. Regardless of the people who built Erden's chapel, the god they praise does not even care about them, and the place is meant to be safe and blessed by his name can't even last a single night. Moving on to the Moon Presence, there's not a great amount of analysis needed here because Flora is the source of the hunt, and the hunt has caused Yharnam a huge amount of suffering and pain quite clearly. Flora is thusly indifferent to our suffering as long as she can obtain her goals, which are still, to this day, not entirely clear. The fate of Yharnam is in her hands, and nothing anyone does besides us, the player, has any impact on this fate. Here is another god who has no care for us, has no care for our suffering, and yet has unfathomable control over us. It's definitely a nihilistic picture because it frames our lives as meaningless in the face of these powerful creatures that do nothing but harm us. Before we finish, let's consider Kos, because she's the closest thing to a real god that we see in the game, as the fishing hamlet all dedicated themselves to praising her. Like the previous Great Ones, it's hard to interpret Kos because we don't know a lot about her, which makes sense since she, and the others, are Lovecraftian entities. We know she washed ashore physically dead, but we don't know exactly how much of her consciousness remained, nor do we know what she thought of the humans around her. Like the other Great Ones, it's more likely she was just indifferent to the people surrounding her, because they left her body and presence in peace. Sure, the villagers found meaning through praising her, but if she doesn't care, what's the real meaning behind their actions? They just found another way to live, with an indifferent and dead god lying on their beach. So that's the nihilistic view, and if you've already left a comment disagreeing with it all and proclaiming existentialism, don't worry, because we're moving on to that. It's definitely hard writing out a nihilistic exploration as someone who's pretty opposed to nihilism, but here I am. And if you're enjoying it, remember to subscribe as we move on to a more optimistic point of view. Does life have to have an intrinsic, universal meaning for it to be valuable? Aren't we, as individuals, able to find meaning where there is none? to appreciate the fact that nothing matters, but take that in stride instead of letting it overwhelm us. Two philosophies that tie into this point of view are existentialism and absurdism. In existentialism, focus is placed on the individual. It's up to us to create our own meaning. There is not an objective and set meaning that we can all access. It's our responsibility to question our own existence and create significance through that exploration. And this philosophy has a very long history with a lot of voices and opinions within it. It's more of an umbrella term than a single agreed upon philosophy, and both nihilism and absurdism can fall under it. Absurdism looks how it's absurd that we all look for meaning in a meaningless world, but instead of becoming apathetic, absurdists find the humour in that contrast and thus find joy in the nothingness. We're here at the end of the day, regardless of inherent meaning or truth, and we should make the most out of what the world has to offer. And because it's a more specified philosophy, its popularity is primarily credited to Camus. With all of that in mind, let's look at Bloodborne and all the points we've made so far with a more optimistic outlook. Despite the hunt being comparable to the trial, a mysterious and meaningless system we're all forced into, we can still find a place within it, as can the hunters around us. We can figure out some parts of the system, some puzzle pieces like how the scourge started and where the source of it is. We can even delve into chalices to try find the history of this mess. The answers we receive are not all-encompassing, there are still gaps and waves of apathy, but we have more agency than Kay ever did, and more ability to deconstruct this trial we found ourselves in. Whether or not that ends with a revelation that reveals the truth of the universe is irrelevant, because we found personal meaning along the way. There's significance in every answer we find, even if we can't do anything with the knowledge. Now let's reconsider the characters in the game. I think it's hard to look at Alfred's story with even an inkling of positivity because it reflects the inherent nihilism behind revenge. What's the point of living if all you do is hate? This encases Alfred's entire story and is proven by the fact he disappears after he's found Annalise. But of course, it's still a purpose. He's given himself meaning despite the hunt he finds himself in, and you can argue that's not nihilistic. Existentialism doesn't say you need to give yourself a happy purpose, just a purpose. His hatred is significant to him. It's his alone, his reason to move forward. And it's clearly not an enduring reason since he dies after getting revenge, but it still mattered to him. Aileen and Jura, though, can be viewed much more optimistically. Yes, they both live within the hunt, but they found personal meanings that go beyond revenge. Aileen has taken it upon herself to hunt down blood-drunk hunters, protecting Yharnam from said madmen. She's found a place within the violence and has survived multiple hunts with this one goal. And clearly that goal was substantive because she hasn't fallen to beasthood despite the effects of the blood moon and that of her occupation. Despite the nihilism of the hunt, she has found significance through her personal actions, found a meaning through the apathy, and become someone who, due to her age, has likely had a deep impact on Yharnam throughout the various hunts. No, she hasn't ended the hunt or saved the city or defeated some Marvel-level threat, but she's protected people. And each life she's saved has a meaning despite it all. Jura has found a similar path. He's also found meaning in protecting people, though those people have long become beasts. It's harder to look at his story positively because, well, the people he's protecting are far past humanity and there's no cure for them. But what we're looking at is if you can find significance within the nihilistic hunt, and Jura does that. He finds a meaning not built on anger, but on sympathy and duty. It is absurd that these characters are looking for something in the hellscape that is Yharnam, but it's human nature to do so. I think resisting that and instead falling into apathy is understandable, but what we learn from these characters is that it's always possible to find purpose in a purposeless world. And furthermore, Jura has acquired knowledge of the hunt that most people don't have. He knows that every beast was once human, and him knowing that doesn't change anything about the hunt, but that knowledge changes him. It gives his mission and life personal significance. I think it's also worth looking at the significance of Queen Yharnam. By freeing Mogo from the nightmare, we've freed the city, but we've also freed the Queen. You can always look at the bigger picture of this game as nihilistic, but from this one moment after killing the wet nurse, I'd say our character has found an interpersonal meaning. Queen Yharnam's spirit, or whatever she is now, has been freed from the torment of not being able to help her child. That won't permanently end the hunt or free us from the dream, but it must mean everything to her. And earlier I mentioned how we fail to help any characters in this game, and that may suggest we'd fail to help any as a great one, but here is the one clear break in the pattern, and it comes right at the end of the game. Maybe, then, we can find a place within the hunt, and when we ascend, we'll remember what it meant to help Queen Yharnam. moving on to an optimistic look at the Great Ones. First of all, if we look at them through existentialism, then it doesn't matter if the gods are indifferent to us because we can find personal meaning through them. It's definitely a nihilistic situation if they dislike us, but I don't personally interpret them as doing so. Even Erden, despite the harm he clearly causes, seems to be an entity almost entirely detached from us, as the word formless suggests. Though, as I mentioned earlier, these are unknowable beings, you can interpret them in a million different ways. But there is a crucial description I've yet to mention. The Moon Rune states that the Great Ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in nature and often respond to our calls. This is clearly great evidence for the interpretation that they are not indifferent, but actively care for us in some sense, at least some of them. And on that note, the game shows us that it's entirely possible to contact them and acquire greater knowledge. It's not just Byrgenwerth's pipe dream. The old hunters beckoned Flora, and the choir worked hand in hand with the Abritus, and Byrgenwerth was able to ascend Rom into a Great One. Furthermore, the numerous statues of Erden and the amygdalas suggest a deep form of connection was made with them, in one way or another, leading thusly to widespread religion. I think the popular theory that Flora sees hunters as her children also gives credence to this argument, though it is just a theory based primarily around her cradling posture at the end of the game. So clearly, we can find significance through these beings, and the entire city did. We've made some kind of connection with them, and we have on numerous occasions found knowledge through them, which can be interpreted as universal and objective insights, the thing nihilism rejects. Let's also consider Kos. Yes, she may be indifferent to the village surrounding her, but that's not particularly relevant to existentialism. The people found meaning with Kos regardless of her apparent indifference or uninterest. She held great significance for every Hamlet villager. She was their god, their provider and sustainer. And it's also suggested by Mikolash that Kos is the one who ascended Rom, though Kos was originally Abritus in the game. Either way, one of those two did respond to our prayers and brought about the creature we meet in the Moonlit Lake. I would say then that some of these gods are far from indifferent. They can provide great significance to our lives and grant us knowledge of the cosmos. Let's also explore what it means when we hunt these Great Ones. Rom is the first Great One we defeat in the game, and by doing so, we reveal the Mensis ritual, the source of this night's terrible hunt. In trying to beckon the moon presence, the school of Mensis destroyed an entire city and caused the blood moon to hang low, which is why this specific hunt seems to never end, and why men are falling to beasthood and madness much easier than usual. Thus, by killing Rom, we're able to enter the nightmare and end it by getting rid of Murgo in some way. Yes, the hunt will inevitably return unless we ascend and stop it, but isn't there significance in stopping it in the moment? Can't we find a balance between the absurd predicament Yharnam finds itself in and the need for us to have meaning within it? For now, the hunt is over. Whoever's left is safe, and I think that's significant. Mogo and his wet nurse then are self-explanatory. Killing them stops the unending hunt as it dispels the blood moon, and we also give Queen Yharnam peace, as I mentioned earlier. Abritus is a less straightforward case, but by getting rid of her, the Healing Church no longer has access to a Great One they can experiment on and with. And I'd say because of that, having less Great Ones in the city is an overall good, and killing the amygdalas follows that reasoning. We don't hunt Kos, but we do hunt her child, the orphan. The curse that was placed upon all hunters due to the actions of the old hunters is pretty nihilistic, because what's the point in living when your entire bloodline has been cursed for something you weren't even present for? But we are able to break that curse and free both the hunters and the orphan by defeating him. Because, yes, the curse was placed on us, but it also trapped the orphan's spirit within the nightmare. It's a clear exploration on how revenge traps us in place, and I'd say it links well into nihilism. Because what's the point of enduring suffering for the sake of a vengeance you can't even remember anymore? Presumably the orphan barely comprehended the people who massacred his home, but he too is trapped in this anger. It's all he's ever known. And we see this clearly due to his similarities with Gurman. The only form he's able to conjure is a distorted mirror of the man who tore his home to pieces. If the story ended there, I'd say it's extremely nihilistic and plain sad, but it doesn't. We fight through the nightmare, free the orphan and ourselves, and are rewarded with this bittersweet cutscene.
Sweet child of Kos, returned to the ocean.
That's the Great Ones covered, but there's still a bit more to say in regards to the characters in light of the DLC ending. Because by ending the nightmare, We also free Maria, who I mentioned earlier as a prime example of a rather nihilistic fate. And by freeing Maria, we subsequently free the doll, who is connected to her through unknown eldritch means. And though I'm not the biggest fan of Gurman, it appears by ending the nightmare, we ease his spirit also. We helped people by ending the various nightmares, and if you don't want to see that as meaningful, fine. But if I was in the hunter's shoes, I would feel that I had done something with real significance. And regarding Maria, it's easy to argue she did find some form of meaning, even when in the nightmare. She's dedicated herself to guarding the hamlet she once destroyed, dedicated herself to making up for past actions. And alongside that, she looks after the patients in the research hall, who are clearly fond of her. This highlights my issue with a nihilistic approach. Yes, you can argue this means absolutely nothing, they're all trapped in purgatory and on the other end of our blade. But I think it's worth looking for personal meaning in every situation, even a nightmarish purgatory, because you are the only one who can create your own meaning. You can fall into apathy and disregard the significance of our personal actions, or you can find comfort in that inherent meaninglessness and use it to form your own story. And that's what Maria did. She could have easily rotted away in some corner of the nightmare like the other hunter enemies we meet, but instead, she took it upon herself to do something with her resources, regardless of the inherently nihilistic situation she found herself in. It's also worth considering that the story of this game is propelled forwards by numerous individuals. Mikolash will wake up and forget what he's done, but the Mensis ritual was still undertaken, the nightmare still created by him and his school. Willem is in a powerless situation now, but it was his will that caused the Hamlet massacre, and thus the creation of the Hunter's nightmare. The Healing Church is crumbling and insignificant now, but look at how much they accomplished in the city. Disregarding all these intertwining actions as meaningless is something you can definitely say, but I feel it's undermining the fact that reality can be changed and moved by us, regardless of the bigger picture. There will come a time where the universe suffers heat death, but we're still here in the now, able to change things and make our own decisions. To finish off the video, let's re-examine the endings and the role of our protagonist. Firstly, the Yharnam sunrise. Yes, the hunt will begin again, but we stopped the Mensis ritual. Yharnam has room to recover, or at least survive, and I'd say that's pretty meaningful. If the ritual had gone on and the blood moon remained in the sky, Yharnam would be stuck in an endless hunt and would thusly destroy itself with beasthood. Ending the ritual, regardless of our ending, has huge significance for the city and everyone who remains inside. And this ending, as they all are, is ambiguous, though I'd say the imagery of a sunrise is inherently paired with hope. Maybe you return to the next hunt trapped in apathy and violence, or maybe you leave and never come back. Or maybe you'll be like Aileen and find a purpose in the hunt. This video has been hard to write for this very reason. It's all very ambiguous, and despite me not putting much weight into nihilism as a worthwhile philosophy, I still think interpreting this game nihilistically is quite valid. And on that point, I find it very difficult to interpret honouring wishes positively. Replacing Gurman in purgatory whilst the hunt continues on is very nihilistic and frames our actions as completely meaningless, as the cycle will continue anew, now with us as the figurehead. But I still think what we did during the hunt is significant. We stopped the Mensis ritual after all, which could have plunged the world into an endless hunt as far as we know, and we certainly found meaning throughout the journey, through various characters or insight gained. For childhood's beginning, it's much easier to interpret optimistically due to the intense ambiguity. As we've gone over, you could see it as a horrible eldritch evolution, but at the same time, we could change everything. We are a great one, after all, with a greater comprehension of reality, so we definitely could remember the whole journey. And we're cradled by the doll, a woman who has love for humanity, and that suggests we'll grow to love them too, regardless of the hunt and our advanced state of mind. The only person we'll ever interact with in our growing life is this woman born from man's twisted desire, much like us being born anew through the hunt. But she still found it in her to love humans. She would have the most reason to be an apathetic nihilist, but with the little knowledge she has, she chose meaning. And despite it all, I think we'll do the same. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. It's a new subject on the channel, so I hope it was palatable, and of course let me know if you want more on nihilism. I could definitely say a lot about Dark Souls. I'm also not a proper expert on the subject. I have a lot more I have to read over my life, so if you have any corrections or things to add, feel free. I'd also like to say I've started streaming on Twitch again, as my PC is finally built, so come and join me there if you want to A, know what I look like, and B, hear my insane ramblings in between videos. We're almost at 1,000 followers over there, so I would greatly appreciate the support over on that platform. But that is all for today, so remember to subscribe, join the Discord, and support me on Ko-fi if you'd like. Thank you again, and goodbye.